My daughter attends, or pretty soon attended, the University of Oregon, where she got her degree in architecture. And we went up there the first semester that she attended to kind of check things out a little bit. And it's a gorgeous university if you get a chance to go up and take a look there in Eugene, Oregon. It's pretty spectacular. Go Ducks, right? So over the course of our little tour there, we went through their student union center, and there's kind of a catwalk that leads you through it. And one of our views, looking down from that catwalk, was this particular area here. And it struck me, and the reason why I took a photograph of it in terms of its composition, and not necessarily the composition of the photograph, but the composition of how things were kind of laid out there in that room. And I'm not sure that they did that from the perspective of where I took the picture, but nonetheless, things were designed here, and they set out in different areas. And what you're seeing in here really is this vocabulary of design that this video will be talking about. And this vocabulary is something that we'll be using over the course of the semester. In fact, it's something in which I'm expecting you to be fluent in here within the next little while as we get into an analysis of communication design, of visual communication design, to see how it works. And to do so, we need to have the right words to go through and put that together. And those words pop up in this, because what you're seeing in here are there's line, there's form, there's certainly shape. Look at the geometry in this, and color as well, and texture. And one more really that is not in Skip Rutledge's vocabulary of design, which is scale, and maybe that's something we can put under contrast. But we certainly see scale here with that big, huge chair in comparison to the normal sized chairs that are there. Everything around us uses this vocabulary. We see it everywhere we go, and yet we're really not all that aware of it. And as not only as designers, but as people who go through and communicate visually, or critique communication, visual communication, need to understand how that vocabulary works. All these images incorporate that into what's going on. So we're calling this the vocabulary of design, and this is a focus on line, form, space, color, and texture. Let's start with line here as we get into things. Okay, lines can be a vertical, horizontal by definition. They're a point that goes from point A to point B. They could be curvilinear, they could be straight. Okay, they manifest themselves in a number of different areas, or a number of different ways. Sorry, horizontal lines suggest a feeling of rest or repose, because objects parallel to the earth, we perceive them to be at rest. And in this landscape, for example, or seascape as the case might be, horizontal lines help give a sense of space, and the lines delineate sections of that landscape, which we see then into space, into that z-axis, or that third dimension. And they also imply some kind of continuation of the landscape beyond this picture plane. You see the last line above the aircraft carrier in the back that goes through and does that. We'll come back to this picture because it's a great example of contrast as well. Vertical lines often communicate more of a sense of energy and height, because they're perpendicular to the earth. So we don't get that sense of resting. We get more of a sense of some kind of activity, and they extend upwards toward the sky. For example, in this canyon, the rope that forms that vertical line suggests ascension, like we're going up, or descension as we're going down, which is the case here. I'm going down this rope, rising beyond human reach toward the heavens. Since its terminus, we can't see where it's going to as it goes, right? Horizontal and vertical lines used in combination communicate stability, solidity, especially when we have those kind of right angles that we're seeing here. Rectilinear forms with 90-degree angles are structurally stable, all right? And that stability suggests some kind of permanence or reliability, unless, of course, you're standing on the Golden Gate Bridge, where this was taken, which is not stable. It is reliable. It's been built to the point where, it's existed for a long time and gone through many a storm, but it moves, okay, there. Well, for what it's worth and what it's communicating. Diagonal lines convey a feeling of movement. Objects in a diagonal position are unstable because they're either vertical nor horizontal, so they're about to fall, or they're already in motion, or they draw the eye through the frame, again on that z-axis from the front of the frame to the back of the frame. So this is the aircraft carrier, the USS Nimitz. We're out at sea, out of the coast of off the coast of San Diego, and you see how those lines go right to the horizon there of the ocean. When I took the picture, I made sure that the height of my camera would make those lines, those horizontal lines, line up until the vertical lines go through and give us a sense of energy that shoots you right off into the sky. Or this one. In two-dimensional composition, those diagonal lines create that depth through those perspectives. And diagonal lines pull the viewer into the image as well. Like in this picture, like in the other one, they lead your eye into space, into kind of a vanishing point where those lines converge. Here, lines are going all over the place. They're, if you cock your head to the right, it almost looks like an unfinished parking structure. But actually, this is the corner of the student athletic building on the campus of the University of Oregon. And they're using architecture. There's this kind of a patina, if you will, these aluminum slats that cover the whole building. And the building itself has this exoskeletal structure outside of the building that actually holds it up. Those buttresses that you see kind of vertically, I shot this so it's a little bit on the diagonal, but they're all part of the infrastructure of this building, or the exoskeletal structure of this. And there's so much energy going on there. The eye just does not know where to rest. It just keeps on going and going and going. The curve of a line can convey energy, and soft, shallow curves recall the curves of the human body. They have a pleasing, sensual quality and softening effect on the composition. The highlights on the pipes of this motorcycle pull the eye through the composition. So light really is working within this as well. That maybe should be another term stuck into that vocabulary, but we'll get into that a little bit later on. If we repeat lines, then we create a pattern. And pattern lines also give us some sense of rhythm to the images that we're seeing, to that visual communication. All right, shape and form. These things define objects in space, and you're familiar with this stuff, right? They have two dimensions. Shapes have two dimensions, height and width, and are usually defined by lines. And forms are three-dimensional, and they are determined by height, width, and depth there. Shape has only height and width, and shape is usually, though not always, defined by line, which can provide its contour. In this image, the circles dominate the composition. There are dozens of circles throughout that in terms of those specific shapes that go on. Form has depth as well as width and height. Three-dimensional form is the basis of sculpture, furniture, motor vehicles, the decorative arts. Three-dimensional forms can be seen from more than one side. And what's interesting about these is they are defined by light, okay, with the position of light, the quality of light, the softness or the harshness of light goes through and changes form without the form changing itself. Light goes through and makes that play with it there. Geometric shapes and forms could be mathematical. They like squares and rectangles and circles and cubes and spheres and cones and so on. Geometric shapes and forms are also obviously man-made, like you're seeing in this image. However, many natural forms also have geometric shapes. We are so influenced by what nature does to us in terms of that geometry. Organic shapes and forms are typically irregular. They're asymmetrical. And they're often found, obviously, in nature, but man-made shapes can also imitate organic forms. Next up is this idea of space, not necessarily the final frontier, but this is certainly a frontier in design and visual communication. Real space is three-dimensional. Okay, space in a work of art refers to a feeling of depth or three dimensions. It also refers to the artist's use of the area within the picture plane. And the area around primary objects in that is known as negative space, while the space occupied by the primary objects is known as positive space. So the relation of positive to negative space can greatly affect the impact of the work. So in this image, the woman in her kayak occupy the positive space down at the bottom, while the blue space surrounding her is a negative space. The disproportionate amount of negative space accentuates the figure's isolation. Okay, this is my spouse on our kayaks in Lake Powell. I took this because I thought, it'd be a great screenshot a great desktop picture, and then all my icons can go up there in the sky, kind of thing. The perfect illusion of three-dimensional space in a two-dimensional image is achieved through using diagonal lines, like I said, going out and diminishing to a point. Now these are curvilinear lines that go out, and then the angle of the kayak also suggests movement through there. But how she's used, how she's placed within that, how this is composed, goes through and gives it a little bit of energy as it goes. Color. Wow, we could spend an entire semester just on this one alone. We won't, but we'll touch on a few things. There are several ideas that you need to understand about color. First off, it's defined as light reflecting off objects. Light contains color that it picks up, okay, as it reflects off objects. It has three main characteristics: hue, which is like red, green, and blue, and so on, or cyan, magenta, and indigo, or the value of the light, how light or dark it is, and the intensity, how bright or dull it is. Colors can be described as warm, like reds and yellows, or cool, like blues and grays, or greens, depending on which end of the color spectrum that we find them on. So let's talk about those three characteristics independently. The first one is this concept of hue, which we call the spectrum of color. And we don't really recognize that color has that all kinds of, there's a dichotomy to different colors that are out there. For example, the blues that you're seeing in this image here with my dogs Ginger and Marianne, or even the tans or the ambers within their coats, are different hues as well. As we're looking at that, if you were to look at this by pixel, you could see there's probably at least a dozen, if not 20 different types of hues involved just in the blues there alone, and the no parking or no barking, as the case might be there, or the grays behind that in terms of what's happening. These are complementary colors as well coming together, complementary hues that work well in terms of this composition. Value is the brightness of color. Designers use color value to create moods. Okay, here's where we get into that whole visual communication aspect, where they're able to go through and make some kind of affective consequence on us. They're changing the way we feel about something. Dark colors convey a sense of mystery or foreboding. Light colors describe a light source or a light reflected within the composition. Here, the motorcyclist's red vest punches through what's otherwise monochromatic about this, forcing your eye to her. And you're seeing line here as well, because the line of her leg goes through and suggests some level of movement going on. Intensity is the purity or the strength of color. And this kind of gets a little confusing. We can go through and if it's the purity and strength, it's also the dilution or the weakness of color as well. Everything has its opposite, but it all falls under the same type of definition here. Intensity describes the vibrancy. Bright colors are undiluted and are often associated with positive energy and heightened emotions in terms of visual communication. And dull colors that have been diluted by mixing with other colors create or sedate a sedate or a serious mood. And light obviously also affects that intensity. I don't know if you can see the Indian paintbrush that's down in the crevasse on the lower third left-hand side of this image, but they've got this compared to everything else that's going on in the image. This is at Torweep, by the way. That's if you see the river down below, that's 800 feet down. That's the Colorado River. That's about 800 feet down. And this is taken on a cloudy afternoon, evening, getting in there, so the light's really kind of soft. And yet those Indian paintbrushes just kind of punch through within their intensity there in other color. The next vocabulary word is texture. This is defined as the surface quality of an object that we sense through touch. Okay, all objects have physical texture, and designers and artists can also convey texture visually in 2 dimensions, like this photograph. It gives you a visual sense of how an object would feel in real life if you touch this. If you touch the wall, or if you touch the toilet paper or the ceramic holder, you already have an idea just by looking at it of how it works. Okay. What's interesting about this is the only reason why texture works within this is because not only the light, but the angle and the quality of the light that's hitting this. The light's coming from a diffused window, so it's not a real harsh light. It creates those diffused shadows. And then it goes through and accentuates the bumps that are on the wall, as well as even pulling out detail within the toilet paper itself that way. PJ here, her pelt is soft, and that's accentuated by diffused light. And it's in contrast in the color there and the details of her hair. A juxtaposition to that texture is the texture of the concrete underneath her there that you're seeing. So the vocabulary is this: it's line, shape, space, color, and texture. All right. And as we study these more and as they become more assimilated into your vocabulary, into your way of evaluating design, you'll see that none of these are really mutually exclusive. They can be, like we saw in some examples, but like in this image here of this, the interior of this old Volkswagen Beetle, you can't escape it. It's around you everywhere, and it goes through and comes together to form some type of context, some type of affective consequence, and get you thinking the cognitively about what's going on. That's why these terms are so important.